The Bank of Canada maintained its core interest rate, holding it steady at 4.5%. And despite some success in lowering inflation, it doesn't rule out hikes if the economy and government adds more fuel to the fire in the future.
Ian Lee, the associate professor at the Sprott School of Carleton University, joins us this morning yet again. Good to talk to you again, Professor. What's the message, not only that you've taken from the Bank of Canada's decision to stand pat again, but also what you think Canadians in general should be hearing when they say we're standing pat for now?
I think what they said yesterday, and I certainly watched the governor, very closely and read the Monterey Policy Report and the statement. What they're saying is inflation is declining slowly. Core inflation is down, but food inflation is still above 10%. So it was a mixed message. And they did, most importantly, say the economy is still too hot. They're not yet down to where they want to be, which suggests there could be additional interest rate hikes.
Okay, so there could be more hikes on the way, and they are forecasting that inflation will slow to about 3% end of this year. However, for people looking to, take out an interest rate and look for lower rates, when do you think they will start actually lowering the rates? Is it too early to talk about that right now?
I think it is. I know the markets have priced in a rate cut this year, 2023. I think that's premature. Certainly David Dodge thinks it's premature, the former governor of the Bank of Canada. I've thought it's premature because if you haven't even got down to the target rate of 2%, and the Bank of Canada itself has said they're not going to get there until the end of 2024, why on earth would you be cutting rates before then if you haven't arrived at the finish line? So I cannot see interest rates going down until we've at least arrived at the finish line, and the Bank of Canada has defined the finish line as 2%. We're not there yet.
Yeah, and Ian, this is a really bizarre period because we're in an inflationary period. Typically that means job losses, but instead we saw the recent job numbers, 35,000 jobs added to the economy. Our unemployment rate is at its lowest rate it's been in decades here. So there's a real balancing act that the Bank of Canada has to do, and of course the government as well with its levers as well. What do you make of the kind of current circumstances Canada's facing?
Well, you're right, Nick. And the other, to even make it even more complex for the Bank of Canada, is our closest neighbor. That's the U.S., largest economy in the world. We're tightly integrated in the U.S. economy. It still appears to be going red hot. And the Federal Reserve says they're going to drive rates up further. What's that got to do with us? Well, if they go up further, we're going to, I think, have to go up with them, because if the gap gets wider between Canadian and American rates, the impact that it has is it drives down the Canadian dollar because money can go to the States to get the higher rate. If the dollar goes down further, we import a lot of stuff, about a third of our economy, including food. So that will push up food inflation. So that's why it's such a tricky balancing act for those who say, well, just cut interest rates. Well, first off, it would hurt inflation. It would exacerbate inflation. And secondly, it would drive down the dollar, which would further worsen inflation.
Yeah, and speaking of that balancing act, Ian, we're doing a story today covering how Canadians feel about the federal government's budget. How carefully does the federal government need to watch all this so that they're not teetering on, increasing inflation by spending more?
Jen, you're absolutely right. I have been critical of the fiscal policy of the government of Canada, running very significant deficits. Any deficit is stimulative. That's, we talk about in any recession, we're not in one, but in past recessions, we say, well, let's do some deficit financing to stimulate the economy. This deficit is stimulative, while interest rate increases are the opposite of stimulative. So what the government is doing between the Bank of Canada and the Minister of Finance is they're driving down the road. My metaphor is they've got one foot on the brake, the Bank of Canada interest rate increases, well, the other foot is on the gas pedal, which is the deficits. So there's a contradiction between the two, and I think that the finance minister must be much more mindful of this going forward.
You can't suck and blow at the same time, right?
Precisely. That's exactly what I'm saying.
You can try to do this, though.
That's true.
That one's a little easier. All right, Ian Lee, Associate Professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Always appreciate your time. Thanks, Ian.
So much.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jen.